Could there be a new shooter in town? A Bleacher Report mock trade sends Bogdan Bogdonovic over to the Orlando Magic for a couple of pieces that you guys might not want to send over. Today we're going to be talking about another mock trade as the NBA is well within its dead period in the offseason. Guys, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Join the Magic Digest family here on YouTube. We're trying to build an Orlando Magic basketball community here on YouTube. Now, let's get into the mock trade and a couple of things that I must preface before we continue. Okay, so looking at this is coming from Bleacher Report. It sends Bogdan Bogdonovic over to the Orlando Magic, and the Atlanta Hawks receive Cole Anthony, Jett Howard, and a 2025 first round pick. Now, we're just going to be talking about what these players mean for each franchise and going over kind of their impact and whether or not they're even going to be traded in the future, maybe not so specifically in the realm of this trade. Now, before obviously I get into the part that discusses those players, I do want to mention just the idea of this trade really quickly before we get into that. Okay, so do I see this trade happening? Right now, no. As of today, no. I don't really see this being something that either team is going to jump at the opportunity to do before the season starts, nor do I think the Orlando Magic are going to make a move like this before the season starts. I did at one point think that Wendell Carter Jr. was going to get traded. I was buying into some of those reports and rumors, but I don't really think I see a trade going down for Cole Anthony prior to the start of the season. I think we need to see more of what Jalen Suggs can do before they decide to pull the trigger and trade him. Nor do I think they would trade him for a forward. I think they would trade him or try to trade him for a fellow guard. And I don't know if a team like the Hawks would be interested in his services. Now, they do have a 25 first round pick in this trade, as well as Jett Howard. So I definitely think the youth is also there with those guys. Plus, Bogdan is 32 years old, so at the end of the day, I don't really think they're getting younger no matter what, because Cole Anthony's 24. So it's, there's a big difference as far as age is concerned. So I don't really think that's a huge thing, but just something when you're looking at at this through the lens of this trade. Now, let's get into what can Bogdan Bogdonovic offer to the Orlando Magic. Well, when we take a look at what happened last year, we do see obviously some really, really big concerns with the offense. Now, I wanted to go back to this trade really quick. The logic behind this is how close the Magic were to getting out of the first round and how poor the offense was, the least efficient offense of all postseason participants, and that includes the play-in. Now, those are just games, one-offs, or even two. But they're not really full series like the Orlando Magic had. But still, least efficient offense in the playoffs, and the Magic obviously have major issues when it comes to perimeter shooting and supporting the scoring for Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner. Now, if you're an Orlando Magic fan, you clearly know that the Magic had an issue scoring even with Franz Wagner. Like, he struggled as the series went on mightily. He had a couple games there where you were really seeing it, but the only guy who was even remotely consistent was Paolo Banchero, and that's usually not going to be a sign of success. So it really comes down to the entire offense and the entire roster as a whole really struggling on that side of the court, because there was just no offense, especially when we got to a point in Game 7 where just could not stop the bleeding, and when the Cavs started getting on their way and reducing that lead, it was just over in a sense. But I digress a little bit there. I think Bogdan Bogdonovic would have definitely been able to fix that, and as a guy who can shoot and score, we saw that in the Olympics. I think his stock is probably as high as it has realistically ever been, maybe. So I think there's definitely something to be said about a guy who can rise to the occasion and help in the playoffs, and I think Bogdanovic could be that guy. Now, giving up Cole Anthony and Jett Howard is kind of a fairly large asking price, especially for a guy who is 32 years old. But I will say, when we're talking about Cole Anthony, I'm not exactly going to be the biggest on the court fan. I do think he's a glue guy, and it's somebody that I want to see during this season. But I definitely, with everything that I've said, despite not thinking that this trade could happen now, I do see something like this potentially happening near the trade deadline. Now, let's get into what exactly is going on with Cole Anthony's situation with the Orlando Magic right now. Well, obviously he's been the sixth man, the guy who's been getting the most consistent and most minutes off the bench for the last couple years or so. He's averaging 12 points per game, 4 boards, and 3 assists. This comes off of his last year's statistics. Now, I will say those are good. Those are good numbers, and nobody was really exactly disappointed too much. Now, they are career lows for the most part across the board, especially with how much he's been playing, but he did get 6 Man of the Year consideration at the early part of the season, so there wasn't going to be any sort of reflection on this season thinking that he played poorly. But when we look at his numbers in the playoffs, they dropped drastically. It was 5.1 points per game, 32% shooting from the field, 2 boards and 1 assist. That is going to be a really, really big black mark on his resume from last year, and it's definitely a point of concern when we're talking about the Orlando Magic being in a win now mode, when we're going to expect multiple playoff appearances in the coming years, and Cole Anthony is going to have to be one of those guys who steps up. Now, there was a lot of guys, as I've mentioned, who did not step up whatsoever for the Orlando Magic, and he kind of just falls in line into that group. But when we're talking about a guy who we really want to keep, a Sixth Man of the Year candidate, you can't really fall into that line 2 years in a row. So that's why I do always say, and I've said this in other videos, and I'm going to continue to say it today, I don't really see Cole Anthony getting traded as of right now. But as the season goes on, and with the different questions that the Orlando Magic need to ask as far as their roster is constructed, I definitely would not rule it out, especially in a trade for another guard. Now, I also think that that's why this trade doesn't work. I don't think the Orlando Magic would trade or make this deal if it wasn't for another guard. You're really at a very, very clogged part of the court, part of the position areas for the Orlando Magic. The forward position would just get too ridiculous if they were to make this sort of deal. Now, I know Jett Howard is also in this deal. I don't really like him in this deal, but I will say still we just don't know as much as we should about Jett Howard, so I don't really think they would deal him either. But if he's kind of being slightly underwhelming but getting more minutes in the NBA, I definitely could see them potentially putting him in a package. I think him and Anthony Black are probably in the same boat as far as we just don't know what we have with them yet, so we might throw one of them in the package, but never two, never both. So that is something to it. And also, I don't really think that this team is really all that in the mood to trade that first round pick. Weltman has said multiple times that he doesn't want to do it. But I will say, getting Bogdanovic back, you're going to have to give something up for him. I just don't think that the Magic would give up any of these pieces specifically for him, or we would have to redo this sort of deal. But going back to Cole Anthony, because I'm a little bit all over the place here, just needs to rise to the occasion in the playoffs next year and continue to show us that he can be that scorer off the bench and can play consistently and be somebody that we can rely on. Jalen Suggs is going to answer. He's going to be asked the most questions. He's going to have to bring the most answers as the year goes on. Okay, when we're talking about a guy like Suggs, it's going to really be, can he be the facilitator? There was a certain point where Cole Anthony was that facilitator. He started a lot of games a couple years ago and was averaging almost 6 assists per game. Jalen Suggs is going to have to get to that point. We've seen some playmaking ability from Cole Anthony. If Suggs can do that, and it could be that reliable table setter that Paolo Banchero said that he wanted, honestly, I can very much see the team trading away Cole Anthony and getting some sort of guard that can really shoot. Even a guy like Bogdanovic who could slide over, to like any sort of backcourt position, depending on what kind of, lineup that you're playing. Right now, I don't really know how well that fits for the Orlando Magic, but I will say was really impressed with how he played in the Olympics. So I am certainly a fan. But like I said, just there would have to be a few things to figure out with this sort of trade, but I definitely think it's really interesting. Cole Anthony is going to be a guy who we're going to have to watch closely this season. The play of Suggs is going to matter the most, potentially for Anthony's trade value and whether or not the team wants to trade him anyway or feels the need that they need to get another point guard, potentially. There's a lot of different moving parts with this, but I'm very interested to know what you guys think about the Orlando Magic situation as far as this trade and whether or not you want to see us get another shooter and what you really do think about Cole Anthony. I've made a lot of videos over the last 3-4 weeks about Cole Anthony and some of the players that we could end up trading. Obviously, nothing's going to happen prior to the season, but would just love to hear what you guys think about the current roster. I think that there is, as this roster is currently constructed, a ceiling. So I think it's fun to talk about, but let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and I will see you next time with more Orlando Magic basketball content.